This is your World War III update. Big news. Vladimir Putin today spilled the beans, exposed some vital clues at understanding exactly what is going on in the hostilities between East and West. And he slipped up several times when he was speaking about nuclear weapons, when he was speaking about spying and hostilities increasing, and the relationship with Trump and sanctions. Just so much stuff, a treasure trove of information for the analytical mind. We're going to decipher it all today for you. Now, before I do that, I want to send my regards to my American brothers and sisters celebrating Thanksgiving. I always get a lot of comments on the channel saying, hey, you're so pessimistic about everything. Why don't you be more appreciative of how great things are in the modern day? And to that I say, you can't be a prepper without having an appreciation for where your water comes from, where your power comes from, where your heat comes from, where your groceries come from, and every other frivolous things you indulge in the modern day. We appreciate all that, which is why we try to preserve it. For me, every single day is Thanksgiving, all right? And I remind you right now that many of your leaders, the highest ranking public officials in the United States, have strategically relocated their families onto military bases because they're afraid for their lives. For whatever reason, we don't know precisely the reason, but I can tell you, they're definitely preparing for something. How fortuitous is it that now they effectively have a blank check to put the National Guard wherever they want for any reason? The precedent has now been set. Unfortunately, it came at the expense of the casualties of the National Guardsmen and women yesterday, unfortunately, and but they don't mind exploiting that for what I talked about in my video yesterday, which is the consolidation of power for the purpose of priming people to the civil defense infrastructure that's going to be in place when the shit hits the fan, because they're expecting things to go sideways very soon. Now, we need to talk about, and there's a statistic that I've been wanting to share with you guys. And I know we've talked about this in the past, but this is really going to put this in perspective, because people might be thinking to themselves, why the hell does Europe want this war so much? Well, this is it in a nutshell. I mean, this is an amazing statistic, okay? Get a load of this. Now, I've talked about this map before. This is like a year old, all right? I didn't make this map. I think this was from Forbes. The Donbass, the part that the Russians control, the part that they always talk about, you know, it's all Kherson and Zaporozhye. It's always an afterthought. Crimea has some more strategic utility, Kherson as well, because it's, you know, a warm water port. But this is the vital part, because this region alone, this tiny little region, contains $7 trillion worth of resources. The majority of Ukraine's resource wealth is concentrated in this area right here. And this is mostly non-renewable resource wealth. So we're not talking about agriculture. We're talking about, you know, rare earth minerals. Now, how much do you think natural resource wealth is in all of Europe from this way westward? Take a guess. Less than this tiny little piece, and that includes the Scandinavian countries. Okay? Think about that for a second. This is an afterthought for Russia, who has $75 trillion worth of resource wealth. The Donbass alone has $7 trillion worth of resource wealth. Isn't that incredible? Compared to France, UK, and Germany, good luck finding information on it, okay? Because it's so small. The number of non-renewable resource wealth is so small, it's not even reported on. Now, they also happen to have the most amount of debt. And of course, that doesn't include Belarus, I forgot to mention. So you have Belarus, the expensive side of Ukraine, and all of Russia now unified. They control all the resources. Okay, so in Europe, you have a debt crisis, you have a demographic crisis, and you have no resources. And the scramble for Africa appears to be over. Anyways, at least for now. So this is why Their only hope in hell is to conquer Russia. That's why they're throwing everything at this. That's why they will not relent, because this is their salvation. All right? There's so much money to be made there. And let's not forget that the United States, remember when Trump strong-armed Ukraine into signing that rare earth deal? You know how we don't talk about that anymore? You know how there were like these tentative, tenuous, I should say, security guarantees that went along with that? I mean, that's still there. That's already there. Okay, so there already is a bit of a security guarantee in place. But, okay, so I just find that fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I think all of Norway is like 1 trillion, and they're one of the, the highest in terms of oil and gas and things like that. Europe is used up, and this is what they need, man. It's incredible. Something to remember, and that's, before the euro and all the other things, okay? Now, let's talk about what Putin had to say today. Where do we begin? I'm going to begin with a statement about Witkoff, then we're going to go right into probably one of the most important things and slips that he had with respect to nuclear testing. So today, Putin says, when he's doing this Q&A, with respect to Witkoff being spied on, and they're claiming that this was somebody in Europe, some nation state, some intelligence agency, likely the MI6 in the UK, who basically recorded this phone call between Witkoff and his counterpart in Russia. Putin says the following: those who are eavesdropping should track their own affairs better. Even if you're trying to spy on one, you should do that with skill. Okay, Mr. Witkoff is a person of culture and understands that mutual respect is necessary. Dissect that for a second. Those who are eavesdropping should track their own affairs better. And when Putin says this, he says that actually in this clip, but I'm not going to bother playing it. He says it with this grin on his face, as if to say that we are tracking you, or possibly that it was a what do they call it? A double agent, a double tap, I don't know, where they knew that they were being recorded, so they were careful with what they said type thing. So, signaling that, and many people have suspected, it seems like Putin is always one step ahead of the West. And could that be because they do have a very robust espionage network and ability to intercept communications, and thus they know what our next move is going to be. Even if you're trying to spy on someone, you should do that with skill. Like, what does he mean by that? Does he mean that, we knew you were spying on us, so maybe not Witkoff, but maybe the Russians were very careful with what they said? Something to think about. Now, with respect to the withdrawal from territories, and this is a huge one, okay? There have been no drafts of a treaty on Ukraine. Now, you remember when Trump just said, oh yeah, we just have a few tiny little teeny-weeny points and we're going to have this wrapped up in a week. Well, as it turns out, not true. There have been no drafts of a treaty on Ukraine, only a set of questions for discussion. What? Only a set of questions, not even points of agreement per se, not even an established framework, just questions in preparation for a framework. We've seen it. It could be it could form the basis for a future peace agreement, but some points require further discussion. I mean, how many qualifiers can you stuff in a sentence? Could be the basis for a future peace agreement, but some points require further discussion. So, I mean, what he's saying is this is months away at best. For example, the demand for Ukrainian troops to withdraw from the Donbass and other territories is non-negotiable for us. The Russians still have a long way to go in the Donbass. And of course, because Dnipropetrovsk is not too far from the Donbass, they have to be concerned, the Ukrainians that is, that maybe the Russians are going to make good on their promise that they made earlier in the year when they said, you know what, we're going to establish a buffer zone. A lot of people forget about this, but a part of this is going to be some sort of demilitarized buffer zone, which is going to extend across Kharkov, Sumy, And this oblast that I cannot pronounce, I'll give it a shot. Chernihivska. All right? Because these are where, Russia makes contact with Ukraine. So they want a buffer zone there. The implication is that they would take the whole oblast. And I think, Vladimir Putin probably, why would we presume and why would Russia want to stop? If the Ukrainian government collapsed precipitously and the front lines collapsed, what would prevent you from keeping going at that point? You might as well just seal the deal. So this is what they're worried about. And they're very maximalist about not withdrawing from territories. Neither side are. The Ukrainians are never going to agree to forego control of those regions. Russia views the plan positively as a framework, but emphasize no final version exists yet, and that direct bilateral U.S.-Russia talks are preferable over involving Europe. Russia panders to this false diplomacy by playing into the good cop, bad thing. Like the U.S. is the good cop and the Europeans are the bad cop. Now, when you look at a map, yes, United States has $45 trillion worth of resource wealth. Europe is the one who really wants Russia's resource wealth. And it seems as though the Europeans are hoping that the Americans will help them overtake the Russians in order to do so. And the Americans stand to benefit from that in a myriad of ways. It keeps the resources out of control of the Chinese. It also creates an environment where they continuously sell weapons to the Europeans. So it's very profitable. It keeps people fighting one another. So it allows both of their adversaries. And yes, Europe is an adversary to the United States at the end of the day, because they're a competitor. The euro competes with the USD. So there's a variety of reasons why they stand to benefit from keeping this thing going. Not only that, probably covering up all kinds of corruption that's occurred inside that country. So that's what's going on with respect to their rejection of the territory swap. Now, in terms of the meeting that is supposed to take place next week, Russia does expect a presidential envoy, Steve Witkoff, to visit Moscow next week, although that hasn't been confirmed by Ryabkov, although Putin did say that, so we're going to take him at his word. He is the final say after all. To visit Moscow next week to bring instructions from U.S. President Donald Trump. We are ready for direct talks amid the healthy new relations that were emerging with the incoming Trump administration. And here's where he slips up again. He steps out of character. We didn't expect new sanctions on Russian oil companies. Kind of downplaying it, but passive-aggressively making reference to this, that these major sanctions were imposed on Russia by the United States, by the Trump administration, and more are being planned. He says, we didn't expect these new sanctions on Russian oil companies that harms our relations, and I didn't even understand what was going on, right? Completely playing dumb. And then he comes back into frame. Putin confirmed the Kremlin is preparing for the delegation and praised Trump's realism in approaching the conflict, okay? Knowing full well that the United States and Russia are arch enemies. They have been so since the Cold War, since the end of World War II, when they got rid of the middleman. So this is very important because this is suggesting that there is real tension there behind the scenes. The Tomahawk missiles are still in play. Nuclear seems to be in play also. And it's really a matter of how long can they keep up this facade of diplomacy before somebody snaps. And Trump has periodically broken character, as has Medvedev on occasion, and basically amounted to threats back and forth from Trump to Medvedev and from Medvedev to Trump, that Trump better watch out, right? So Medvedev says what Putin's inside is actually thinking. So this is very important stuff. It's very important that you do not take these things at face value. When they say this is a chess game, they mean it. This is a 4D chess game. And if you're just looking at it on the surface, you're going to be missing, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Tip of the iceberg is 10% of the ice that's actually underwater. Now, on Zelensky, he says that we can't make a deal with Zelensky. They're an illegitimate government. And that they've been so for like a year and a half since they were supposed to have elections. Well, remember when Seymour Hersh a few months ago said that Zelensky is not long for this world. In fact, his replacement has already been selected. It might be that Zaluzhny, a former commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, and that would be taking place within months. Now, we're a couple months overdue. I'm getting vibes from Zelensky that there's a certain sense of relief in his mannerisms that he will be leaving soon. There seems to be a sense that at least his role in this is going to be resolved. Again, the Russians, they seem to think that that's a big portion of this or plays a big role in this. Obviously, the network that Russia calls the criminal clique is the ones in power, and I guess they feel if you can get rid of those guys, then they might have a better attempt to have some sway over the Rada, which is the Ukrainian parliament. So they're saying that in order, like that's a requirement, a prerequisite, is that Zelensky leaves. So it could be the case that Zelensky capitulates, and I think part of the reason why they want to keep Zelensky in there is that if it appears as though Zelensky has endured longer than Vladimir Putin, then that's kind of a victory. Like if Zelensky leaves before the war ends, then, Putin can say, well, we won because he's gone and, I'm still here. And even if there have to be concessions made on the part of the Russians. And maybe that will be what happens. Maybe that's going to be one of the points of conversation and maybe that's why Zelensky is so relieved, because really he doesn't look like he wants the job, if you know what I mean. And I don't blame him. It's a very tough place to be, between a rock and a hard place. Putin also said that he has no intention of attacking Europe and is open to formal legal confirmations of this, but accused the West of escalating risks through Ukraine support. He always says the West, right? He's very careful with his words, because the West encompasses the United States. When he talks about nuclear matters, he talks about the U.S., but he doesn't talk about the POTUS. He's very careful in terms of not alienating the United States in any way in the statements that he makes. Now, with respect to what's going on with Europe. So Europe is getting ready to stage a response. Europe is now seriously considering what was once unthinkable, a retaliatory response against Russia. Following a series of Russian provocations, including drone incursions, GPS jamming, and acts of sabotage, the EU is discussing possible countermeasures, such as cyber attacks on key Russian infrastructure, sudden NATO exercises near Russia borders, and information operations aimed at Russian citizens, all things that they've been doing so far. So I'm not really sure what the point of that statement was. They've been doing these things for the longest time. Here is what Europe wants, okay? And this is very important. A new resolution has been prepared in the European Parliament, and the main points are the following. A ceasefire in Ukraine must be accompanied by a reliable security guarantee from the United States and the USA. Europe only wins if they can oust Vladimir Putin, decapitate the Russian leadership, and take over the country and break it and balkanize it into little bite-sized pieces. That's their plan. In fact, they have a map that was circulating at one point. I don't know how, real it is, but that's the idea. Remember, they need the resources. It's not even a question of, can they, make it without it? They need the resources, especially to build out the war machine. So this is why they need the United States so much. Anyways, recognition or rejection of recognition of the new Russian territories, the principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, about Europe without Europe. So effectively, it's an Article 5, all for one for all. The agreement must not limit Ukraine's right to choose alliances and to protect its territorial integrity. So they're rejecting any sort of demilitarization of Ukraine and caps on troop numbers inside Ukraine. How you'd even keep track of that when you got mercenaries, militias, other agencies. I don't even know how Russia, would even make such a demand, because it'd be impossible to track unless you were in complete control of the country, which is why a lot of Russia's demands like denazification and demilitarization do require them to have full control over the country. Not that I think they want the West, because as you can see, it's really not worth it. As long as they have this eastern part, they're probably happy, which just so happens to be where a lot of the Russian speakers are. Seizure of frozen Russian assets to secure loans on Ukraine. I believe that the only holdouts for that one are the Belgians, but don't quote me on that. There is some resistance, but not much. The resistance is dwindling, and I'm sure the United States is not an advocate for this, even though I don't want to play too much into this phony divide between Europe and the United States, because for the most part, they are aligned. If the United States wanted to extricate itself from the conflict, they could have done so a long time ago. Clearly, Europe has some leverage over the U.S. in this matter. Otherwise, they would have walked and said, these are the dividing lines. Zelensky, get the hell out of here. We're putting in this other guy. And that would have been that. But they haven't done that, which means that, they don't have all the cards. Because if they did, then they would have walked. Lifting sanctions on Russia only after signing a peace agreement, and in case of refusal, new anti-Russian sanction packages. So no concessions where it really fundamentally matters. They'll do the language thing, they'll do the, even though they won't really do that, it'll be like a segregated society. They will do the prisoner swap. They will probably do some swap for the children who were kidnapped. So they claim, and there is a lot of human trafficking stuff that goes on in these environments, as our recent guest indicated. But anyways, so that's what's essentially going on there. All right. Now, Germany, on that topic, apparently released a secret 1,200-page war plan. They actually did this. I think this is an older story, but it's making the rounds once again. It's the military Schengen plan. Schengen, I think it just translates something into, having open borders for, the fast flow of freight and just free-flowing corridors that they can move large amounts of military equipment across unimpeded by, all of the potential bottlenecks and things of that nature. But for that, you need to build out infrastructure that can support that type of heavy equipment. So in response to what's been going on, Germany is pouring money into upgrades using private contractors, changing laws and reviving Cold War era practices to make the country a reliable military corridor. Now they're saying that we need to move up to 800,000 NATO troops across its territory towards Russia during wartime. But that will not be enough troops to fight an attritional war against Russia. And what I have long since suspected is that they're preparing for one of two scenarios. They're preparing to go to war with Russia to occupy it after some big arrow, decapitation maneuver where they just are lucky enough to not get nuked. Maybe they neutralize a dead hand like they've been trying to do when they took out the radio station there that sends out the emergency action messages, as well as other aspects of Russia's strategic nuclear triad. But there's two potential reasons, because for an attritional war with the Russians, the Ukrainians are doing it on, 1 million troops. So 800,000 is not going to be enough. So either this is for the purpose of occupying a Russia in a post, World War III world that isn't an irradiated wasteland, or it's a way that they can get their own population on lockdown after a full-blown nuclear exchange. Because as friends of the channel, Mark Rush has indicated, as well as Stephen Harris, one of the adjunct authors of Nuclear War Survival Skills, They both are of the persuasion that this grim, bleak picture of nuclear war that is depicted in the media, because of course, the doomsday scenario, it gets a lot of clicks. But the reality is it's survivable. Okay. And that's the scary thing, to think that it's survivable, because that means they're more likely to push the button. If it's an order of magnitude less bad than what they're making it out to be, then the likelihood that the elites might actually move in that direction is much, much higher, especially if they have different mechanisms of electronic warfare, asymmetrical style attacks, drones that can neutralize launchers on the ground. If they do this massive coordinated cyber EW, satellite-based, like the whole 9 yards, then maybe they can destroy the Russian leadership and destroy all the Russian military with only taking a few nukes back. Now, I'm not saying it's a feasible plan. I'm just saying that that's something they might be thinking about. In fact, they've written policy papers on how they can win a nuclear war without using nukes at all. And it does boil down to this Operation Spiderweb type stuff, where, a lot of it is acts of sabotage behind enemy lines. So, in terms of Venezuela, what's going on there? Now, it looks as though it's about to go down. Maduro claims that 82% of his population is ready for war. An unprecedented 82% of Venezuelans say they are ready to defend the homeland with arms. Now, there has been a Russian general who has been there, and apparently this is a pretty standard rotation. The Russians, they do assist Venezuela in training. I believe there's about 150 training officers there who are training the Venezuelan military in, army tactics and drone use. Not necessarily stuff that's going to help them intercept missiles, although Venezuelans do have some Russian Su-30s, I believe, and I'm not fully aware of what their capabilities specifically are. But, when this Daily Mail article is kind of embellishing it a little bit, Putin sends top general to Venezuela along with troops tasked with training up President Maduro's forces. I mean, if they're just doing that now, then it's not going to have much of an effect, right? Because that war could start really any minute now. But they've actually been there for many, many years. And what I suspect is going on is that there could be something happening beneath the surface. And I actually think that this is playing a big role in this upcoming negotiation. Because look at the timing. Look at how these things are coinciding. The American military buildup, as there's this buildup of a supposed peace plan. There's got to be something in Venezuela that the Chinese put there or the Russians put there. There were rumors that the Russians were going to deploy Orezhniks in Venezuela, which seems unlikely considering it's only a weapon that's been used once, and then we haven't seen it again. We've seen other testing of, nuclear powered missiles, the Burevestnik and things of that nature, but we haven't seen we haven't seen them deployed in mass, the Orezhniks. And I think by now they would be using that if they had it, unless it's a very expensive weapon that I presume it is. And I presume one of those is probably worth like 100 Kinzhals, or the other ones that they use. What are the other ones? The land-based launched missiles. What the hell are they called again? They're very, very common. Anyways, I think you get what I'm trying to say. But, what if there's a Cuban, this is where we get into the what ifs, but what if there is a Cuban Missile Crisis going on that we don't know about? What if they've put something in Venezuela that is a big problem for the United States, or they were planning on doing it, that has triggered this Monroe Doctrine level of policing, where you want to try to keep the East out of the West? Now, Venezuela is a massive country. It's, I think, 1.5 times the size of Texas, only it's not all desert, okay? This is like Vietnam type jungle in there. So, a landed invasion, which is apparently what Trump just said in an interview. He said that they're going to start intercepting things on land right away. Well, that's about to begin. So are they going to do that with special forces? What are they going to do? I mean, obviously, we all know what it's about. It's about the oil. It's about regime change. And that's pretty much what is going on in that respect. This is the general who is there. I can't remember what his name is. I have some notes on it. Let me see if I can find him here. Anyways, it's not really that important what his name is, I guess. But he's there, and so the Russians do have a presence in Venezuela, and that is one of their biggest partners in the region. So, yeah, this is World War III, right? I mean, Venezuela is one of the biggest problems for the United States in South America because they are allied with the Chinese and the Russians. Now, Russia might be trying to entrap the U.S. into taking Venezuela, getting the United States to think that it's going to be an easy task, and then secretly help the Venezuelans, ensnare them in some sort of quagmire. Remember, Putin is the intelligence guy, so he knows things, right? He knows. I don't think you could be as cool as he has been, seeing these massive ammunition depot explosions, seeing your nuclear triad chipped away, seeing, half of your tanks blown up, your oil and gas infrastructure destroyed, all of these sanctions. I don't think you could be so stoic in the face of all of that unless you had really, really good intelligence. And I think it shows that he absolutely does. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, look at the military buildup around Venezuela. They're going to illegally invade another country on the basis of some bullshit that they made up. Okay, what else do we got going on here? Now, this is an interesting one. This is from Sarah Bills over at DD Geopolitics. She put out this information yesterday, and it's a map of Chinese targets on Japan. So apparently, China has quietly drawn up a strike map for Japan. Beijing is signaling that if Tokyo, and this is verbatim from their post on Twitter, full disclosure, Beijing is signaling that if Tokyo keeps escalating over Taiwan, it will treat Japan as a hostile state under Articles 53, 77, and 107 of the UN Charter. Now, here's where it gets interesting. PLA missile flight paths into Japan are shown here, and it also includes targets across names I'm going to butcher, but Honshu, Kyushu, and Hokkaido. No, not Hokkaido, Hokkaido. Many of them have nuclear power plants, all right? And we know how vicious the Chinese and the Chinese and the Japanese enmity actually is. So I would not be surprised if they would go to that extent. Launch sites in China, as well as on the Korean Peninsula, and submarine strike zones positioned around Japan. So tensions are most certainly rising. Now, the Japanese president recently said that denied that Trump said that they should restrain themselves in their comments so it doesn't potentially mess with Chinese-U.S. relations. But they deny that Trump actually said that. So I'm not sure what to make of that. I thought that might have been a comment that Trump made on camera when he was asked. But they've downplayed that Trump has imposed this request upon them not to antagonize the Chinese, and that they indeed are going to still put missiles on an island chain that is in and around Taiwan and come to Taiwan's defense. Taiwan, of course, is going to be spending $40 billion on U.S. weapons. And there's also a bit of a spat between Russia and Japan emerging. And this is where, the World War III picture just gets clearer and clearer every day. The dividing lines are really becoming very well defined. Russia warns it reserves the right to respond toughly to Japan's reported plans to deploy missiles on Yonaguni, Japan's westernmost island, according to the foreign ministry. So Japan is arming up, and they're starting to put missiles on their outlying islands, on their periphery, which is a sign that things are escalating in the Pacific. So when we look at this as a global chessboard, it's the best way to understand it. The U.S. says, okay, we're going to move our forces into the south. The Chinese say, okay, we're going to see that, and we're going to move, some forces where we're going to move them. Japan follows in suit. Russia follows in suit. Taiwan. So it's all starting to really come together. And the Ayatollah is not missing his invitation to the party, as we're going to discuss in a moment here. I also just want to say, on the topic of Europe, France is starting voluntary enlistment. Isn't that just like always the case? Well, apparently, I guess they weren't, taking a lot of recruits, but now the goal is to bring in 50,000 new soldiers every year, up to 100,000 a year by 2030. France is rolling out new voluntary military service as Macron warns Europe can't afford to show weakness in the face of Russia's threat. Okay, so I think that's all we have to discuss on the European front. Got about 50 pages of notes here. Now let's talk about what's going on very briefly in Iran. There is one more point worth mentioning, and that's that Germany has pledged $11.5 billion for Ukraine next year. That's just one country to prop them up. Okay. Now, they really think that they can wait the Russians out. All right. They really think that. But I think Putin's nuclear threat today might have sealed the deal. Now, the Iranian nuclear talks have collapsed. Do you remember when we had Professor Zhang on here? Probably, what was it? I think it was on the Canadian Prepper channel, probably about, a month and a half ago. And he was quite certain that shit was going to hit the fan in Iran in a couple weeks. And of course, things have been very quiet there. Well, now Israel is concerned because they're attacking somebody in the usual, pearl-clutching Karen fashion, where you attack somebody and then you fear for your life and, talk about how bad everybody else is. Anyways, they're about to invade Lebanon. And so they're on a high state of alert because they think that the Iranians are going to respond. Now, the Ayatollah is kind of making out like he knows that shit's going to hit the fan. I'm sure Putin has told him if he has any intelligence on what's about to go down. So the talks on nuclear stuff has collapsed. The Trump administration is not paying attention to it. Obviously, they're now focused on the South. But I would not be surprised, and it actually would make a lot of sense, if all of these wars just started at the same time. Right when the U.S. starts in on Venezuela, the Israelis are tasked with the Iranian issue. Then you have in the Pacific, the Japanese, the South Koreans, Taiwan, and of course the very large U.S. military presence in that region as well, potentially interdicting some sort of embargo that maybe gets imposed by China. But you can imagine that if the Chinese are getting 1 million barrels of oil from Venezuela a day, it's not make or break for them. I think they use like 15 million barrels. I'm sure they can make up for that shortfall somehow. But they do have an interest in maintaining that relationship there. And then, of course, there is Brazil, who's a member of BRICS. So anyways, the Ayatollah is talking about the importance of the Basij. This is a volunteer paramilitary force. They say it's comprised of up to 10 million people, which is really 1 out of 4 able-bodied males in the country. It's a country of 80 to 90 million people. And he says that the Basij must continue across generations, calling it a national asset and the main force of resistance of global powers. And of course it is, because without it, you have a situation in which what happened previously, where you had all of these sabotage attacks and these drones from the inside and attempts to topple the government there. So they're getting ready to be far more vigilant, to impose, I'm sure, more strict forms of martial law. And they seem to be of the belief that war is going to break out in December. Okay? So that is potentially going to coincide with what's going on in South America. Now, while we've not seen them go on the initiative, it is not beyond the realm of possibility that they might be the ones that initiate a fight against Israel, as unlikely as it seems, because of course Israel has nuclear weapons. But if they see the Americans caught up in a quagmire in Venezuela, if it's that, or who knows, maybe the government there gets toppled very quickly. Again, it looks as though Maduro is walking around with crowds of people around him, coming out unscathed. He's not getting sniped, which tells you that there must be a lot of support, or however much they're trying to pay the opposition to take him out is clearly not enough. So maybe they do have 82% support. And if that's the case, it's going to be harder to take him out than maybe they think. And they're going to get stuck in a multi-billion-dollar conflict, which, as I said yesterday, will lead to more austerity for their own population in the United States. It will lead to inflation. It will lead to more people who are disaffected and unhappy with the system, which will lead to more civil unrest, which will lead to more stochastic terrorism, which will lead to more police state crackdowns and the build out for the civil defense infrastructure that will, of course, be used to police the population after the nukes drop. On that note, I think I'm going to leave it there. If you guys want any of what remains at CanadianPreparedness.com, use the discount code for 40% off last Black Friday. I believe we still have a couple things, like we have a lot of survivor cord. It is the type of paracord which has the different strands in it. Like it's got a fire strand, it's got a fishing line, braided wire, snare wire. Really cool stuff, and it's discounted 40%. Okay, anywhere else in Canada, you're spending double. It's a great stocking stuffer. I believe we have quite a few different colors. We have a lot of stuff left. I mean, we still probably have about it's hard to say what's accounted for, because we have, I don't know, there must be 1,000 or so orders that are still pending, that the elves are working very hard at getting out in as expedient a manner as possible. But that is one of the things that we have an unusual amount of still. And we still got a lot of books, just certain books, not all, but, certain books like Green Beret, survival skills. And, there's hundreds of different books. So, go check it out and make sure you get your Jace Medical. And of course, if you're in the United States and you want freeze-dried food, freeze-dried wholesalers, my buddy who owns the company has been radio silent as of recent. And usually when he does that, that means he's involved in important matters. And of course, because they are involved with the military and they sell their food to the military, I would not be surprised if they're very busy right now with respect to that. And, if they have a lot of orders in. So, just do your level best to get as squared away as possible, because inflation is going to get worse when they start money printing. Apparently, there's some volcanic activity around the world. There's 6 major volcanoes. This one's in Ethiopia. Look at that, hey? Isn't that incredible? Ethiopia's 12,000-year-old volcano sends clouds of ash. This might actually cool the planet a bit. If you get enough volcanic activity, that can create enough soot in the atmosphere that can block some of the solar radiance and lower the planet's temperature by a couple degrees. Let's see what happens. It's that or nuclear winter, one of those things. All right, my friends, take care. Talk to you soon. Happy Thanksgiving, which is every day if you're a prepper.